for a second.
See her?
Now that we found our hearse. What you talking about?
Right there, sitting down.
Oh, well, we can sit down too because we got a while. Smoke a cigarette. So we're waiting for our hearse tour in Savannah. Huh?
You left your hat in the car.
My hat? My witch's hat? Nah. Okay. You want to say hi?
No, I don't want to say hi to nobody.
So full of shit. All right, guys. So I'm gonna show you the hearse.
So,
all right. So let me.
She turned her back. She turned her back.
Those are the hearses. We've got like what 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Before takeoff.
Yeah.
And so we're here in downtown Savannah. I used to come here every weekend. This place is absolutely gorgeous. Hopefully I can get the cathedral later. But we came for the main attraction on Halloween, which we had to book like 3 months ahead for the hearse tour. And we'll be right back. Okay, so what does that form on the tree look like to y'all?
Huh?
What does that form on the tree look like to y'all?
I'm not even going out. I'm not even, don't even entertain that.
You must gonna post this on your.
We should do that one day too. That's so pretty. Look at that pretty horsey. So across from where we're sitting is the haunted walk tour from Savannah.
The actor who plays Michael Myers,
which is pretty good if you want to be active, but we just want to chill and ride. I got my phone, I'm filming. So we're on the hearse tour. Yay! See, this is the back of it.
Oh God,
They're like, oh God, here she goes.
This is the back of it.
We're still waiting on some people. I'll blur you out, don't worry about it. But we did take some really cool pictures. I'll post them on here.
This is one spot, one car I really didn't want to be awake when I ride in. You know what I mean? Say.
I know.
This is the only chance you get to be awake when you're riding one.
Yeah.
We all leave in a Chevy.
Yeah.
Obviously, all that was the first house here in Savannah to receive working plumbing.
I guess that's the horse hearse tour. So I'm gonna film as good as I can without filming any other people with us because they're fixing to load up. So we're on for the ride. I'll get a copyright strike for that.
If anybody needs a mattress, they got some here on the right.
The alley of creepiness.
Alright, so we're going to actually start off back in Reynolds Square where I just picked up from. And for those of you that don't know, Savannah is the most haunted city in the United States.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And some people say the world. So, you guys have picked an awesome time to come on the tour. And, you know, because Halloween's coming up, so that means our veil is thinning between our world and their world. So you never know what we might see out here tonight. So keep your eyes peeled. They were housing the bodies around here, and they would bring them out to the center of Reynolds Square. And they would actually cremate them in the center. So there's now a statue standing there of John Wesley. And people taking pictures completely unsuspecting will go home and they'll look at them and they end up seeing what looks like apparitions and orbs around the statue. And they believe that that is those that have been cremated in the center of Reynolds Square.
Oh, we get a picture later.
Now, on the right here, I don't know if you guys have been to Old Pink House, but it's a restaurant now. It used to be home to the Habersham family. And the employees that work here say if you spend any time working here, you're going to most likely have an encounter with one of the spirits that reside in this building. And most of them spend their time in the basement, which is also coincidentally the bar. Now, Mr. Habersham, they say, pretty nice. Doesn't bother anybody, you just see him and he kind of disappears. But his wife, on the other hand, not such a nice spirit. She's been known to push some of the employees, and occasionally she has hissed in their ears while they're doing work, and it usually seems like if they're being a little too noisy, she doesn't like the noise, so that's why she's doing that to them. Now, in the basement, they have the women's restroom, and it has a door that the locks have been taken off and changed multiple times over the years. because guests were constantly getting caught in the stall. They couldn't open the door. Even Johnson Square. And if you notice, the trees here, they don't have any Spanish moss on them. And many say it's the fault of the man that is buried in the center of it, Nathaniel Green. Nathaniel came here second in command to George Washington during the Revolutionary War. And by all accounts, he just really hated Savannah. He didn't like the heat. He didn't like the moss because it reminded him of his grandfather's beard, and I don't know why that was bad, but apparently it was. So Nathaniel would have his servants go out and take the moss out of the trees near his house. Well, apparently they weren't doing it to his liking or something, because on a June day he actually climbed into one of the trees and started doing it himself, but he ended up passing out from heat stroke. So at that time, the way that they treated most of their patients was by doing bloodletting. That means putting leeches on their skin and drawing out what was ailing them. Well, they didn't know that Nathaniel was actually hemophiliac, so they ended up bleeding him out to death. So Nathaniel was buried actually over in Colonial Cemetery first, and we didn't know where he was for a good 100 years until about 1900, and a man came here doing some historical research and finally figured out that Nathaniel was actually buried in the Graham tomb out there. So he went ahead and had him moved over here with his son. His son was put in underneath the monument in the middle, and as soon as they did that, the moss stopped growing in Johnson Square. So 1800s and 1800s, so I think sometimes they just kind of buried him wherever they landed. And he also, before it was even the colony, up on the River Street, it was actually an Indian burial ground. So people have seen people in Indian clothing up there, and especially at Factor's Law.
So it's the graveyard city.
You betcha. So we're going to come up here to Wright Square, and like I said, we're both on the bed, and no exception to that rule. So on the right, when we turn, all these buildings here are on the grounds of these cemeteries. Cells in there, which I'll tell you about in a minute after we come back around. But first of all, I'm going to tell you about the first murder in the colony of Georgia. Happened right here in Savannah, across on Hutchinson Island. And it was a young lady named Alice Riley and her friend Richard White that committed the murder. So Alice and Richard came here from Ireland, and they were planning on starting over their life and finding their way to freedom, but they ended up in completely the opposite. They ended up working for a man named William Wise, and by all accounts, William was not a nice man. He was gross and just not somebody you wanted to be around. Kind of liken him to nowadays, he's the guy sending you the pictures on the dating app that you did not ask for. So William had them working for him, and he had one task that Alice absolutely hated doing. He had her giving him baths. Now, Alice was in her 20s, and William was probably in his 50s. And she obviously hated doing it, so her and Richard, after about 6 months, came up with a plan. They were going to kill William. So they did just that one morning. Richard walked up behind William with a handkerchief and twisted it around his neck. And Alice wanted to make sure the job was done, so she dunked his head in the pail of water. Now they took off, and they got about an hour and a half down past here, but some of the people from Savannah came after them and brought them right back here to Wright Square. And they put them in the jail. And at that time, the jail was here where the CVS pharmacy now sits. So they were shackled to the walls and awaiting trial. So Richard was tried, and he was taken out to the gallows where he was hung. Alice was tried, and she wasn't taken out to the gallows right away. She was actually kept in that jail for about 7 more months because she was pregnant. And she claimed it was actually William's baby. So she was allowed to give birth. But she was housed here in the where the CVS is in the jail there. And she was shackled to the wall. So there are apartments up there and people that work at CVS that have heard those shackles, and they've seen shadow figures, especially down in the CVS area. Now, Alice, once she did give birth to her son, was taken out to the gallows, and she was hung, and she was actually left to hang in the center of that square for 3 days. They wanted to send a message, and that message was, if you're going to do things like this in the colony, this is going to be your fate. There have been sightings here of a woman in the center distressed and hysterical looking for her infant. And the cops are called and they come in and they don't find anything. But when they take witness statements, they describe the woman as fair skinned with flowing red hair, and she's wearing an outfit that doesn't look like it belongs in this time. So it's led to believe many that what they're seeing is Alice. We've had some paranormal activity happen in there pretty recently too. They had two employees working, and one was in the back part and one was up here in the front. And she saw somebody come through the door and they meandered on back to the back, or so she thought. So she went back to check on her coworker to see if she could be of assistance, and the coworker said there hasn't been anybody in there in quite a while. So they checked the store thinking, well, maybe they missed a person. Pretty small store, pretty hard to miss anybody, and of course they didn't find anybody. So they pulled up the security footage, and about the time the first girl had thought she saw somebody come in the door, a black puff of smoke enveloped that front door and dissipated into the store. Now, that row there has other things happen all the time. The glass door next to it, the owner there will set his knife on the table and come back, and he's the only person in there, but it has gone missing a few times and showing up in some other peculiar places within the store. Now, we needed some more space, I guess, so they ended up moving most of the people there. Some of them are still, the remains are still there. But when they removed some of them and dug up the trees, they ended up finding that some of their bones were actually intertwined into the roots of those trees. Now, we're going to come up into Chippewa, and you guys most, know it for Forrest Gump, but we're going to talk about Mrs. Foley. Now, Mrs. Foley was a widower and she moved to Savannah. She needed a way to make money, so she ended up buying a house here on Chippewa Square. And she turned it into a boarding house. Now, you can stay here actually. It is now called the Foley Inn. It's coming up here on the right where the flag is, and those two lights are in the front. Now, while she had the boarding house here, she had a regular that would stay here, and he was a Union soldier. And he developed a little bit of a thing for Mrs. Foley, but Mrs. Foley was not having it. She was actually dating her carpenter. So, the Union soldier was staying here one time, and he decided that he was going to show up in Mrs. Foley's bedroom. So he was standing on the side of the bed, and when she opened her eyes, she saw him there, and she grabbed her heavy candlestick and she hit him over the head when she killed him. Now, up until about 1987, everybody thought this was just some far-fetched tale about Mrs. Foley, but when they started doing some renovations on that house to open it in, they opened up one of the walls, and guess what was behind it? Skeletal remains. And that skeleton was wearing a Union uniform. So Mrs. Foley had her carpenter lover put him in the wall instead of calling the police. So apparently when they opened that out and found the man back there, and of course we didn't know his name and we still don't, so they've actually named him Wally. And when they opened that up, Wally must have opened up some of the portal or something to the paranormal, because since then they've heard disembodied voices and they've seen a man walking through the building and he'll just disappear into a wall. Now, there was a lady that stayed there not too long after it opened, and she was walking down those front steps one afternoon. She'd go out on the town and she saw a man walking towards her, and she greeted him, but he didn't say anything, so she just kind of looked back and didn't think much of it until she saw him walk up the steps. And when he walked up the steps, he walked through that front door, never opening it. Now on the right here is the Savannah Theater, one of the oldest theaters. And the building itself is not original, but the foundation is. The theater has had 2 major fires and it sustained some hurricane damage, so it was rebuilt. But with that foundation apparently came some of those people that were killed in the fire. Now, there was an actress that loved the theater and spent a lot of time there, and she was on stage during one of the fires, and the stage actually collapsed on top of her. Her name was Betty, and poor Betty was killed immediately, but she still comes back. She comes back a lot of times on opening night, and she's seen off to the side of the stage, and occasionally they see her peeking out from behind the curtain. Now, that same fire also claimed a young man named Ben. And Ben was about 10 years old, and he was up in the balcony with his family watching the show. And when the fire broke out, everybody took off, but they didn't bother to look and see where Ben was because he had fallen on the ground, and he ended up being trampled to death. So, I like to think that Ben is up there and he's still living his best afterlife, because the SCAD students that go up there and do a lot of the spotlight work have had, on more than one occasion, feel as if somebody had just tugged on the back of their shirt while they're operating the spotlight. And they'll turn around and look and they don't see anybody. And they've also had their shoes untied. Now, the ushers have actually been called up there because during a performance, people will say, there's a child up there that's running around and distracting them from enjoying the show. They'll come up there and look, and they don't find anybody. And former owner's only problem is he's been dead for a few years. But he's been seen at the end of the bar enjoying one of his favorite cocktails all the time. So make sure you stop on through. You guys watch the Ghost Hunters and Ghost Adventures and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Okay, have you guys seen the Sorrel Weed House, any of the shows about that?
No.
Okay, well, Sorrel, oh yes, Sorrel has been featured on a lot of those shows because they say it's definitely the most haunted house here in Savannah, and a lot of people say probably the entire state. Some go as far to say the entire country. Now, the Sorrel house that we're coming up to, before it was even built, had some interesting stuff happen right here. Now, the Sorrel house is here on the right, and you have the carriage house in the back, and the courtyard, and then the main house is the orange color. Now, before this house was even built, the bloodiest battle during the Revolutionary War was actually fought right around here. And it was the siege of Savannah. And they estimate that between 700 and 1,000 men were killed. And many of them were buried in a trench that was dug right here where the Sorrel house is, and they were put in there. And they believe that some of them were actually still alive when they had the dirt put on top of them. Now, the Sorrels came along and they ended up building this house here, Francis and his first wife, Lucinda. And they had 3 kids, but Lucinda died not too long after they moved here. And after that, he kept it really, really simple. He just married her sister, Matilda. And Matilda and him had 7 kids. And they had 10 kids in this house at one point. And Francis, by all accounts, was extremely wealthy, and he loved to show off his wealth. So he would have parties here. He'd often spill out here into the center square. And during one of these parties, his wife was looking for him. Matilda was looking for Francis because she had a message for him. And she couldn't find him anywhere. And she had a trusted servant named Molly. Now, Molly actually had her own room above the carriage house, which was not something that usually happened in those times. So she couldn't find Francis, so she went to look for Molly. And she could not find Molly anywhere. So she headed up to Molly's room, and when she got up there, she knocked on the door, but nobody answered, so she pushed the door open, and she actually found Francis and Molly together. So now you know why Molly had her own room. So Matilda took off and ran back down to the main house, and she went up to her room on the 2nd floor. And when she got there, she walked out onto the balcony, and she actually dove off head first. Matilda killed herself that night. And about 3 weeks later, Molly was actually found hanging from one of the rafters in her room. Some people think she was murdered. Some people think it was suicide. Now, if you do go visit this house, you can do a tour there. And they have had people leave the tour early that have went up into the carriage house because they feel as if they actually have something tightening around their throat. And some of them feel an overwhelming sense of dread when they get up there and actually leave the tour. Once they're clear of the building, that all kind of goes away. Now, Matilda has actually been seen, or what they believe to be Matilda, up on that balcony. And she's usually wearing a white dress, and Matilda, the night that she died, was actually wearing a white dress. Now, like I said, we had the siege of Savannah out here, and people just walking by, unsuspecting, maybe on a tour, have had things happen to them that they can't explain when they walk by that building. They're usually young men, And they all feel as if something has just pierced their either ribcage or the back led by the kidney. And they often believe that it's probably one of those soldiers that doesn't know he's long since dead and the war is over. Now in the basement, they capture a shadow man a lot on film. And he tends to pace back and forth in front of the windows. They also believe that to be one of the soldiers that is buried there. And they think he's still patrolling and doesn't know that he's long since been dead. Assuming you guys know about the book, Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is where Jim Williams lived, and Jim lived here. This was the last house he lived in Savannah. He actually lived all over the city, and this was his pride and joy. So when he moved into this house, he hired a young man named Danny Hansford, and Danny would work for him with his antique business. Well, what a lot of the people in the city had no idea was that Jim was gay, and him and Danny had had a relationship. So his house was right here on the right, the Mercer Williams house, with the two lights in front, and Jim's office was off to the left. So him and Danny had a relationship, but it was pretty volatile. Danny had a drug and alcohol problem, so him and Jim would get in a lot of fights. Well, on this particular night, Danny came over demanding some money, and they ended up getting into a fight, and Danny shot at Jim, but he missed him. And Jim returned fire, but he did not miss. Danny actually shot him to death. So Jim was taken in and arrested, and he went on trial several different times. So after his fourth trial, he came back here, and he was trying to get back on with his life. He always planned these lavish Christmas parties, and it was getting close to Christmas, so he was in the midst of doing that. But he had a problem. He was seeing Danny everywhere he went in that house. So he ended up calling in one of the voodoo priestess from South Carolina. And she was actually seen in the front of that house one afternoon chanting, and many believed she was there to rid the house of Danny. Now, not even 3 days later, Jim actually suffered a massive heart attack and ended up dying right almost to the exact spot where Danny had died years earlier. So some people think that what killed Jim was Danny, because he finally scared him to death. And other people actually think that it was actually the priestess that cursed him, and that's why he died. They believe that during his trials, he was using her assistance, but he never paid her. So he didn't pay up, so he ended up dying for that. Well, again, we'll never know that. But Jim, like I said, would have a lot of parties, and he would always have them on Christmas Eve. Well, not too long after he died, this was converted into a museum. But people walking through the square on Christmas Eve have heard some noises coming out of this building, thinking that there's a party going on there. Stay there when Miley was filming down here. And they had an encounter with Anna. Apparently, they weren't putting their stuff where Anna thought it would be. So every morning when they woke up, Miley's boots were neatly put on top of her suitcase. And she knows she did not leave them there, but Anna apparently did not like when she was leaving them, so she would put them on top of her suitcase every night. He was trying to get some stuff done before everybody came in, and he was in the kitchen across from Marshall House, and it's here on Bronx. And it was a hotel initially, but twice over its life, it's actually been a hospital. Once was for the yellow fever outbreak, and the next time it was for during the Civil War. The Union actually commandeered the hotel and turned it into their hospital. Now in the 1990s, they were doing renovations to reopen it, and they were on the first floor pulling up some of the floorboards. They were a little shocked at what they found. They found some of the amputated limbs and some of their shoulders. Now why they weren't buried in the ground outside, I guess we're never going to know the answer to that. But they found them underneath the floorboards, and what they determined is that first floor was actually the surgery. One of the rooms was. So, they had some sightings of the soldiers there. And they've lost some of their employees on pretty much their first and second day. Because they've seen, particularly one soldier that is seen in the lobby quite often. He's usually walking around, and in his hand he's holding part of his arm, his other arm. he's looking for a surgeon. He's asking for a surgeon to help him. And of course, there's no help. But they've had when the construction was being done, they had some construction workers quit after they went down in the basement. That's because they saw 3 men down there. And it was 2 soldiers, and they were carrying a 3rd soldier on a gurney, and the soldier on the gurney had absolutely no legs. So some of the construction people that were down there ended up quitting right on the spot and not finishing their job. Want to be here on the weekend, and we had foot patrols. The officers would walk around the city, check on things, and they had 2 officers that would always come by here. And they knew the schedule, so they knew when to expect there to be crowds and people here. Well, they walked by here one night and the lights were on and you could hear laughter and clapping. So they went in to look because there wasn't supposed to be anything going on in here. So they wanted to see what was going on. And as they walked into the theater, and
I told her not to do
there was nobody in there. But they were sure that they heard laughter and clapping. So they kind of shrugged it off. But it happened to them again the next night. So they had to actually write a police report on this, and there's actually it on file. So you can see the reports that they had to write. So after a while, they just kind of stopped coming past here, and they pretty much ended up ignoring it if it was on night to where there wasn't supposed to be anything going on in the theater.
So that was the hearse tour. You liked it, baby? You're wobbling because you were sitting so long. That was fun though, wasn't it?
I just rode in my hearse. I spected it right in a hearse one time in my entire life, and you just killed it. Yeah.
Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween. Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween weekend.
You get shit.
See? There's that haunted movie theater. Huh?
I guess the horses that made it halfway to that tour now.
Yeah. Somebody. Maybe we'll see something.
I need to go to one of their festivals. Didn't make it to this film festival, but whatever one they have coming up next, I'm gonna see if I can go get to one.
All right, that's the end of our hearse tour. We're fixing to be at the park house now. So, hope you enjoyed watching.